Thank you very much for tuning in and listening to this episode 13 of the HuddleUK podcast. Firstly, just wanted to say right from the outset, and apologies for those of you who have been listening on a weekly basis. It just got to the point where it was a little bit too much this off season with life commitments and all the rest of it. Hit that age, but I'm sure you will all remember when you hit it as well, where everyone around you seems to be having kids and getting married. It's making life very, very busy at the moment, but we're still committed to getting this podcast out. We've just changed it to once a fortnight instead of once a week. We have been doing the division by division roundups, but today we're just pivoting slightly because of the draft last week in Green Bay. So much to digest, so much to talk about. At this time of year, just after the draft, everyone is in the Dynasty leagues and they're trying to find out who the best rookies are. We wanted to work out who the best rookies are. There's only one person we can speak to, really, Rich. That's at Dynasty Island over at X, the co-founder of the Fantasy Sanctuary, the man who's got all of his spreadsheets, who knows all the data and has all the facts for us. He'll be joining us on this episode as part of the HuddleUK podcast. Just before we get into the conversation with Rich, a very quick plug as we do at the start of each episode, please remember to go and follow us over at Join the Huddle UK, the website with all of the post-draft content. We've got 3 or 4 stories going up every day from the writers for the teams that you support, telling us what they thought, giving us the grades. We've got the first round reviews and all the way through to day 3 picks as well. So make sure to go check that out. We've had the Colts, the Steelers, and the Packers reviews go up today. That's on Friday as I'm speaking to you. We've got loads more, I think, including the Chiefs going up on Saturday. So make sure to check that out. And you can listen to this podcast over on the website, www.huddleuk.com, or you can listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So that's the plug-in. Remember, this episode will be on YouTube and the rest of it as well. You can go watch the clips from that there or over on our social media. Give us a follow. Make sure to give Rich a follow. Without further ado, let's get into the conversation and chat these rookies. I've been dying to talk fantasy football on this podcast, and I'm glad to have the opportunity now post-draft to do so. Joining me on this episode of the Huddle UK podcast is Dynasty Island Richard, senior contributor for DLF and the co-founder of the Fantasy Sanctuary. Even apologies. How are you doing, Rich?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
I mean, I'm sure like me, you talk fantasy, dynasty, drafts, and all the rest of it until the cows come home. How many leagues are you in?
I've cut it down a lot. I got up to 60. This year, I'm currently at 21, and then I have 2 redrafts. So I'm going to cap it probably about 25 this year. But yeah, I find the more time I'm spending producing content, I don't have time for the leagues now. I'd love to play more. But yeah, I just had to cut it down over the last couple of years.
60's mad. I'm in about 15 and I find that quite intensive. Are you mostly dynasty leagues you're in then and a couple redraft?
Yeah, so there's two redraft that I do, like my home leagues, and then there's the charities, Best Balls, Scott Fish Bowl, and then Warrior Bowl each year. So I guess you class that as four redraft, and then the rest are all dynasty.
You said a home league. What's the longest one that you've been in? How many years has it been going now?
So it's my mates from uni. So that would have been 2010 was the first year. So this will be our 15th year.
Was university you're in? That was my in as well.
So I was a bit before that. Yeah. So I played since I was 13 with just down at Sussex Thunder. My brother saw an advert in the newspaper when Sussex Thunder first formed, and we went down, had a bit of a run around, didn't really know the game, and we're hooked since then. So I was playing prior to uni as such.
Just quickly for those, I'm sure most people listening, the majority of NFL fans I know are fantasy fans, but for those who aren't, you'll hear a few buzzwords. I've already mentioned Dynasty, redraft. Difference between those is a redraft league is just focused on season by season. Dynasty, which is Rich's speciality, and of course in his username as well. That's a league bit like it. You'd be actually a general manager. You draft your team, and that is your team year on year. You can make trades. That's my favorite sort of league. I'm assuming that's yours as well, Rich. The other one we might mention is a keeper league. That's slightly different, where you choose 1 or 2 players to go through. And the other bit of jargon you're going to hear us talk a lot about going forward now is things like the 201. We're going to be throwing around a lot of numbers like that. The first number in that is what draft of a rookie draft or a mock draft you would take the player. So if it was a first round pick, it would be 1, and then 02 would be the second pick in that. So just to get that out of the way in case there's any new players listening, because I'm sure it can be a bit confusing to that. We'll try break down the position by position from the rookies, specifically looking from a dynasty perspective today. Start with quarterbacks. Question I wanted to ask you, Rich, to start, because I'm currently in a super flex league. rookie draft. Cam Ward went 103, which I feel is about where he would go in a super flex. And we had three other quarterbacks go in the first round of this 12-team
Wow.
league, which I find crazy. Where do you think the line is on trying to, because in Superflex League you have two quarterbacks, so you can start two quarterbacks, but people sometimes overvalue them in these rookie drafts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every Dynasty Superflex league, I say it's a microeconomy. Like how, particularly at the quarterback position, how leagues value quarterback varies hugely from league to league. So it's difficult to have kind of a hard and fast rule. My general rule of thumb is I always say that if a quarterback is a solid, secure starter, so i.e. they've proved something at the NFL level, they've got a contract or a situation that gives them that stability, they are worth a first round pick. So in this year's draft class, I look at it, Cam Ward, absolutely worth that first round pick. I've got him as my 102 in Superflex League. So whoever got him at the 103, that's good value.
That would be
Now,
me.
the rest of the guys, I personally wouldn't spend a first round pick on. I think that Jackson Dart has got some upside, has got some talent, but I've got serious questions about his processing ability. I also don't quite know what the Giants are doing. Like we could have a new head coach, new GM next year. It's carnage. So I can't spend a first round pick on a guy that I don't know when he's going to start or I don't believe in. And then I presume the other two are maybe Tyler Shuck and Jalen Milroe. But those guys are all second round picks, if not later, because I think Milroe, you know, I always say this. I think he's a year away from being a year away. I don't think he's got all the talent in the world, all the upside, um, but his accuracy is erratic to say the least. And Tyler Shuck, I think, yeah, he's got the potential to start for the Saints, but we don't know quite what's going on with Derek Carr. And if Derek Carr is going to start for the Saints, then you've just wasted a first round pick on a guy that hasn't got much upside, is ridiculously old, and is probably just going to sit on the bench for 2 years.
My jaw hit the floor when they said he was the backup to Justin Herbert in college. I couldn't quite wrap my head around that, how he was in the draft this year. Of course, I'm a Chargers fan, so a big fan of Justin Herbert. But as you say, a first round pick, to be fair, it was the last pick in the first round. It was the 112. But even so, I'm looking at the players who went after him: Egbuka, Scatterboo, Trey Harris. Those are sort of players who, even in a Superflex league, I think, I say think, I think we'd be in agreement there, would be valued or should be
Yeah,
valued
definitely.
higher.
Yeah, definitely. I'd take Igbuka over all of those guys. He's my 10th overall player in a Superflex league. So yeah, I think that's incredible value.
And you said Cam Ward, who it was myself in the 103 who got him there. I wasn't really QB needy. I was hoping that Hampton got to me. Would Hampton be your 103 potentially then in Dynasty? I'm assuming this is that Ashton Jonty is the number one.
Yeah, so Genty, I've got it one. I'd take Campbell too. I'd actually take T Mac Tatorio McMillan over Amarian Hampton. I just think I value wide receiver over running back in terms of dynasty. I'm a little bit concerned about the Chargers' interior, the offensive line. Um, Travis Hunter's kind of the enigma in all of it. I could easily argue taking Travis Hunter at the 102. But I'd take him at the 105 just behind that tier of Ward, McMillan, and Hampton.
What do you think the ceiling is for Cam Ward as a
I
tight
think
round pick?
his perfect scenario is kind of like a top eight quarterback, maybe for fantasy. If we're talking like 100th percentile outcome, I don't think he's one of these guys that's going to be able to carry your fantasy team. I think he's probably going to lock in at sort of the next 5 to 10 years being that back end QB1, high end QB2 that's really, really valuable in Superflex leagues. And plug and play, reliable, but just doesn't have that incredible kind of game breaking ability. I think he's a competent rusher, but I've sort of been comparing his rushing ability to like Patrick Mahomes, where there's not many designed runs. He's not going to scramble huge amounts, but when he does scramble, he's very smart with it. I think we're going to see a few of those Cam Wards where it's like 3rd and 9. You feel like, the quarterback's having to roll out the pocket. You feel you've got in a good place, and then he'll scramble first down and break your heart, just like Mahomes does time and time again. So that's the world I see him as a rusher, and I just think that potentially caps that fantasy ceiling for him.
You're tugging on my heartstrings then. When I think Mahomes, that's what I picture, and he's always in the fourth quarter against us. Running backs then, Ashton Genty, he is, I mean, his highlight reel for Boise State is like something since maybe Saquon Barkley we've not really seen. If you were in a startup now, a dynasty startup, how early would you be punting for someone like Genty, particularly if it was a one quarterback league?
That's a really good question. So one quarterback league. I want to give you an accurate answer, so I'm just gonna quickly pull up my ranks now. So he is my 14th overall player in a one quarterback league. Now, traditionally, I'm lower on running backs in Dynasty than I am on wide receivers, just because I lean towards the longevity and safer floor that you get from a wide receiver. Um, but he's my running back 3 overall. So the only running backs I would take over him are Jamar Gibbs and Bijan Robinson. To give you an idea of how good Ashton Genty is as a prospect, so I have a rookie model that basically it's designed to predict the success of fantasy running backs. I got one for running back, wide receiver, and tight ends across the first 3 years of their career. So he is a 99th percentile prospect in that model. Pretty incredible, as I'm sure you can imagine. Over the last 10 years, players who have finished 95th percentile and above have averaged a best season in their first 3 years of 22 points per game, which is like groundbreaking territory. To give you an idea, the guys that are in his range of value in the model are Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, Todd Gurley. So it's pretty lofty comparisons there.
Pretty good company that he's keeping there. You mentioned Hampton. Well, I mean, you're absolutely spot on, of course, about the issues with the interior offensive line of the Chargers, and Najee Harris there as well for competition. Quite similar star running backs, aren't they? I guess the first year ceiling, someone like a Travion Henderson could usurp that starting role for the Patriots and have a bit more initial value, maybe.
I think I kind of disagree. I'm a bit of a Ramondre Stevenson believer. So I think that Henderson's still going to have to split work. I think that Henderson, for me, as a pure runner, needs a little bit of work. I think his vision sometimes is questionable. He looks to bounce stuff too much. And I think that Ramondre Stevenson's still going to have a role there. I think that with Hampton, he's probably going to come in at the start of the year almost like a 40-60 split, with him being the 40. But I fully expect, as we get towards those fantasy playoffs, the money season, I think Hampton's going to be a 60-70% opportunity share in that offense and really take over. I wouldn't necessarily be worried about Hampton's production early in year one. I think that he's going to get enough work to be competent as a fantasy option. Maybe not the RB1 that you hope for, but I think he's definitely going to be an RB2 as a rookie.
And there's some other exciting rookies, so quite a few running back exciting ones who you feel like if they do hit the ground running could be exciting. Johnson, Judkins, a lot of hype about Scatterbo as well. And RJ Harvey was a player who after the draft seems to have shot up boards going to the Broncos. Any of those in particular you want to highlight, you think that you particularly like, or you think you'd be getting good value? Because the likes of Harvey and Scatterbo are going in the second round of most rookie drafts at the moment.
No, I think all 5 of those are really valid. I think, you throw, if I sort of tier it up, I think you've got Ashton Genty at the top in a tier of his own. I think you've got Amari Hampton in a tier of his own. I'd then throw Henderson, Judkins, and Harvey in that kind of third tier. I think they're all going to be RB2s with upside. And then my 4th tier would be Caleb Johnson and Cam Scatterbo, where I feel a little bit less confident. I wasn't a huge fan of Caleb Johnson prior to the draft. I think I've got some concerns about his receiving ability. I've got some concerns about how heavily reliant he was on that kind of zone scheme. And then he goes and gets drafted by the Steelers, who runs zone run concepts at 72% last year, one of the highest in the league, and he feels like a perfect fit. So yeah, I like him on the Steelers more than I would on 99% of other teams, shall we say.
Yeah, he does feel like sort of the plug and play replacement for Najee Harris, doesn't he?
Yeah, exactly that. And I think that the concern, I guess, is that Jalen Warren's going to see the majority of the receiving work, and that's where the value comes in fantasy. A target is worth 2.8 times more fantasy points than a rush, and the fact that Caleb Johnson's going to lose out on the majority of that work, that's why he's a tier behind those three guys ahead of him. And Cam Scatterbo, he's got an interesting profile. I like big guys that catch balls. That's Cam Scatterbo, absolutely. But let's not forget Tyron Tracy flashed really well last year. So I think that just projecting him to come in and take over that backfield is exactly that projection at the moment. And I'd expect Tracy still to have something to say.
You're a Jets fan, so I don't want to talk about the Giants too much, but the whole Giants offense now with all those quarterbacks in that same room and the Tracy Singletary still there and now a rookie, it could go one of so many ways, couldn't it, next season?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd love to be a fly on that wall in that quarterback room. I think that's fantastic, interesting characters, shall we say? And yeah, like if we're talking ceiling outcomes, obviously they've got an elite left tackle. I see Neal's moving into guard, so maybe that's going to be an answer there. And if they can address the offensive line, that would help them. But Malik Neighbors is an absolute stud. I like Darius Slayton as kind of that sacrificial X that kind of runs some deep routes and can do a lot of the dirty work. And I'm a big fan of Theo Johnson. I think he's hyper athletic and showed enough last year to believe in them. So yeah, it's a really interesting offense. It's got lots of pieces, but you've still not got a quarterback, and I'm not sure any of those three are particularly going to be the answer. So are we going to be looking for a new head coach and GM next year? And then where do you do? You have to rip it all up and start again, kind of thing.
Yeah, no, completely agree. Completely agree. Wide receivers, you mentioned Travis Hunter. I think enigma is the word you use, and many, many other people have used. I'm in a couple of IDP leagues. I'm not sure if you are as well, which are leagues where you get points for defensive plays as well. In an IDP league, he has to be the best prospect there's been ever, maybe, but certainly since I've been playing in the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've dabbled with some IDP in the years. I'll be honest, I don't enjoy it, so I don't play it anymore. But each their own. I fully get the appeal of it. Yeah, I mean, look, anytime any player's going to play both sides of the ball, it's incredibly appealing. I guess the slight concern is that corners, depending on your scoring format, corners don't usually score very highly, just because they're not big tackles. Interceptions are pretty you know chancy and not very sticky, so it's difficult to rely on a corner week in week out. But even if he's only adding 2-3 tackles to his receiving line, that's a significant volume of points at the end of the year. So yeah, look, I recorded a video 3.5 months ago where I was saying Travis Hunter, if you could guarantee me he's 100% playing wide receiver snaps, he'd be my 101 in all formats. So I'd absolutely take him there in an IDP league. I know the Jaguars are saying he's going to major at wide receiver, minor at corner, but there's too much of a knock there. So I could easily take him 101. I could argue him over Genti in normal formats, in IDP formats, in everything. But it's a lot of risk, and for me, I can't warrant taking on that much risk with the 101, which is why I've got him in that kind of 105 tier after the big four.
I'm not sure where your rankings would have Brian Thomas Jr. He's a player that I'm like, I think everyone's quite high on consensus on Brian Thomas Jr., but I'd say I'm even higher on that. He's a player that, particularly in a redraft league, I wouldn't have any issue taking very, very high up. I guess that slightly limits Hunter's upside as a wide receiver, or do you believe he could be the first choice target there on the Jags?
I don't necessarily worry about first target, second targets. I think we've seen enough, second receivers on offensive produce incredibly well. You look at what T. Higgins, Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle have done over the last 5 years. They've each had, borderline wide receiver one seasons being the second target. So if anything, for me, I think Brian Thomas's presence boosting slightly for Travis Hunter, because I think Travis Hunter's got an amazing release package, but I think he profiles more as a flanker that can line up in the slot rather than a true X. Brian Thomas can go and take all those snaps as the true X receiver and do all the dirty work that kind of frees up Travis Hunter to move around the offense. So yeah, I'm a huge Brian Thomas believer. I absolutely love him as a wide receiver. I guess probably the fact that I feel like I'm the one long-standing Trevor Lawrence believer, that I still think Trevor Lawrence is an elite quarterback, and I think that we're going to see that this year. And so probably my belief in Trevor Lawrence allows me to believe that both Jags wide receivers can be superstars.
Ticked off Hunter as the wide receiver, and right at the top you mentioned Ted McMillan, who went 8th overall, I believe, to the Panthers. That was one of the bigger surprises for me. Not that he was a first-round selection, but that he went to the Panthers. That wasn't a team that many people predicted would be drafting a wide receiver at 8. Does that improve his value, or do you think did he go up or down after that for you in your rankings?
Yeah, I think he stayed the same basically. I think I'd always lean draft capital over landing spot. I think as a community, as a group of people, I think we're terrible at predicting and understanding what are good and bad landing spots. How many people did you hear saying Bryce Young had a great landing spot and CJ Stroud had a terrible one? And suddenly they had very different rookie years, and we're sitting there going, oh, well, Bryce Young had a bad landing spot. Look, I think Ted McMillan is exactly what this Panthers offense needs. They need a prototypical X. They need a guy that can win contested catches. I think he fits perfectly with Bryce Young in terms of highly accurate quarterback that can extend plays, and I think he's going to be perfect for Ted McMillan. So I fully get it from the Panthers' perspective, and I think he's a really intelligent move from them. They've got massive holes on defense and that kind of thing, but I think, look, for the Panthers, all that matters is Bryce Young the answer at quarterback? So surround him with as many weapons to find out that answer, because this is such a critical year for Bryce Young, because I think the Panthers need to know at the end of the year if he's the answer or not. So yeah, I really like it. I think to me, Ted McMillan doesn't have that kind of top 12 dynasty wide receiver upside, but I think he's the kind of player for the next 5-6 years you're going to get wide receiver 2, wide receiver production from him, season in, season out.
Those two, Hunter and McMillan, that is, seem to have their own sort of tier, or maybe they're in their own individual tiers. Then after that, there seems to be this bit of a juggle between a few of them. Do you have a favourite of that next group?
Yeah, so the next tier, I've got 3 in that next tier. So it'd be Emeka Egbuka, Jaden Higgins, and Luther Burden. I then have Matthew Golden the tier below. I wasn't a big fan of Matthew Golden as a prospect. Didn't particularly love the film. Rookie model, didn't love him at all. And then really don't like the landing spot. And so he kind of drops for me into that third bucket as such. But Egbuka, if you could tell me that, we could start from 2026, I think you could argue that he could be in that tier with the top 2 guys. I just think it's going to be a year, sadly, where we see a lot of Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, with him not necessarily playing the natural role that he could do. But I love the prospect, and I think he's going to be a phenomenal NFL receiver.
It feels like not as the prospect, not comparing them as players, but in terms of landing spot, the similarities with JSN a few years ago, where everyone was really excited. The prospect then went to the Seahawks, and you're like, in Dynasty leagues, you take him. Now I've got him in like 5 leagues, and I can't wait for this season. I'm really excited. But that's going to be the case probably as well with Egbuka, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the challenge is that, I said in the pre-draft process, the 100th percentile outcome for Egbuka is Chris Godwin's career. And sadly, he's now going to go and sit behind Chris Godwin. I think that, Chris Godwin's his best as that kind of power slot that gets a lot of manufactured touches but isn't afraid to do the dirty work. That's exactly Egbuka. I think if we can get some manufactured touches in the screen game and things like that, he'll repay that. He's a credible blocker and a willing blocker, and that's a rare trait for wide receivers. And I think he could be fantastic, but unfortunately, both of them can't play in the slot. So it's going to be intriguing to see which one of those wins out and ends up going in there.
Just to grab my Chargers jersey quickly, Trey Harris, it's second year in a row the Chargers now drafted a second-round wide receiver. Last year it worked out pretty well. Trey Harris probably not as highly rated as Lad McConkey was coming out of college, but you've just mentioned a minute ago, if you can be a wide receiver 2, so to speak, on a team like your Waddles or your Higgins, you could still have a lot of value. And I think a lot of Chargers fans would probably expect him to take that role now over your Quentin Johnsons and your Mike Williams, who's back as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he is the exact profile that the Chargers need in terms of a big-bodied X that can win contested catches. I think if you were going to say a knock on Trey Harris, he's not a 4-3, 4-4 kind of speed burner, and that's probably the one thing is that he's not a guy that's going to take the top off, but he's got enough speed that he can force DBs deep and kind of then win at the catch point. But I think he's a perfect complement to Ladd McConkey. I think he's going to be a really intriguing option for fantasy. We'll probably see him sit a little bit behind Mike Williams, but the perfect guy to learn from and kind of prototype his game after as such. Um, but he is going to be a little bit more boom bust. This isn't a guy that you're going to be able to rely on week in, week out for fantasy production. I think just given the nature of he's going to have a higher ADOT, that comes with a little bit more risk and a little bit more inconsistency. So yeah, he'll have some 4 catch for 150 yard and 2 touchdown weeks, and then he'll have some 5 targets, 1 catch for 5 yards weeks. Like that's just the way you're going to have to live with Trey Harris, I think.
And just for those who are newer to this world, ADOT is a phrase that we love to throw around, but it's an acronym for average depth of target. So the deeper Rondell Moore was it, I think, who had the lowest one ever at the Cardinals a few years back. I think it was negative something.
Yeah, minus 0.7.
I knew you know that off the top of my head. So yeah, so Rondell Moore was the go-to one. His average depth of target was a yard behind the line of scrimmage, whereas Trey Harris's, what Rich is saying there, will be significantly further forward, and that makes it slightly less reliable. Any other names at the position? There's a few deeper ones. The 2 guys in the 4th round for the Titans. I never know if it's Chimere DK and then Alec Ayamanor. I'm not sure I got either of those right. I'm sure when the commentary teams do it, we'll pick them up. But I guess 4th round rookies, it's hard to get excited about. But in a wide receiver room, that after Calvin Ridley is pretty, like, the competition is there for snaps and for targets with a new quarterback. I guess if they hit it off quite early in their rookie career, it could be suddenly going into their sophomore year and beyond a lot more valued.
Yeah, I think the challenge is that traditionally, once you get outside of day 2, the hit rates on any player is slim. I think DK, he's probably going to be a little bit of a better NFL player than fantasy. I think he's going to contribute on special teams. I think he's going to be that gadget player, that deep threat that is tough to rely on for fantasy. So I'm not holding up much hope there. I look at Humanor. If you could tell me that this guy could catch, I think he could be a top 24 wide receiver. Like, he has everything. I think he's a good route runner for his size. He goes deep well. I think he stems and stacks DBs. I think he's a really impressive player. The challenge is he's got some of the worst ball skills I've ever seen of an NFL wide receiver. So if we can teach the guy to catch, if he can work on that, then yeah, he could be fantastic for fantasy. But I don't know about you, but catching the ball at wide receiver is quite an important part of the position.
Yeah, I think that's as stats go and as facts go. I think that's one of those ones I would put quite high up there. I would agree with you there. I know you've got to go, so I'm going to really quickly just tight ends. There's only really 2 of them of note that people are talking about. Costin Loveland was my favourite one going into the draft, and then got drafted 10th. I think the higher upside, the higher ceiling play though is Tyler Warren. Where would you have those? Is it sort of like a 1A, 1B for you, or do you see one of them as significantly higher than the other one for fantasy purposes?
No, so I'm probably different to what most people and what you said there. Loveland for me is a tier, if not 2, ahead of Taylor Warren.
Me and you, yes.
I think Loveland is a prototypical wide tight end. I think he's going to walk into the NFL. I love the offense. I love the usage in that scheme, and I think he's going to be fantastic. Tyler Warren to me is a theoretical player. He's not a guy that is a good blocker. Okay, he's got good size, he's willing, but his technique is poor. We don't see him line up in line. He's phenomenal with the ball in his hands and after the catch, but he's not a good route runner. He's not a good separator. And I don't know how the Colts are going to use him. I know this is what I was saying earlier about landing spots. I think we're bad at understanding it because people look at it and go, oh, well, the Colts don't have a tight end. So the fact that Tyler Warren's gone there, that's a good landing spot. Well, to me, it's a really bad landing spot because whoever the quarterback is, whether it's, Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones, they're both inaccurate. I want accuracy from my quarterback. As I said, I don't think he's going to be able to line up in line as a tight end 80% of the time. So does that mean we're going to see him line up in the slot? Well, the Colts, to me, have got one of the best pure slot receivers in the league in Josh Downs. I don't really want to be taking Josh Downs off the field to just try and, flex out Tyler Warren. So I don't really see where he fits in this offense. It's like, yeah, he's great after the catch and he is an absolute monster, but I don't really see it. And also, the other thing you've got to understand is that he's a sneaky old prospect. He's coming up to 24. Just to give you an idea, Tyler Warren at age 20 produced 160 yards total in college. Harold Fannin Jr. had over 1,800 yards in college, age 20. Like, this is the difference. We're drafting Tyler Warren as a fifth-year prospect who did nothing in college until that fifth year, So yeah, I like him. I'd take him back end of the first round, but he's a significant tier below Colson Loveland for me.
And just to round off then, I'm going to give you the players that I took in this draft that I'm currently, well, there's only one pick left. I've made all my picks. I was at the third or the 103 and consistently down 203, 303, 403. Got Cam Ward at 103. We like that pick.
Love that. Yeah, love that. Great value.
I got Egbuka at 203.
That's incredible value.
This is the one I think you're going to disagree with. And this was a need because my running back room was, let's say, thin and injury-prone players. I've gone for Bashal Tutin, who's a name we haven't mentioned.
I don't dislike it. I think, as I said, there's those elite two at running back and then the kind of the next five. Tutin would be the next off the board for me. He's my 25th overall player in Superflex format, so I think you got good value where you got him. He's a lottery ticket. I don't know what to expect. He's a freak athlete. The Jaguars, are probably going to move on from Travis Etienne, if not in season, at the end of the season. Tank Bigsby showed some bright sparks last year, but hasn't exactly set the world alight. So yeah, I think Tutin is if you're going to take a dart throw, he's the kind of player you want to bet on because yeah, athleticism, the film and the NFL fundamentals leave a little bit to be desired. But if you're going to bet on traits, bet on athleticism.
Well, we go from that. I rounded off with a 403 with Alec Ayamanor, and I just hope he can learn how to catch a ball. I think I'm quite happy with how that turned out.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great draft. The one thing I always say is that I always preach draft for talent, trade for need. Because I think that that's the way to build a true dynasty as such. But I love the value. I love all the picks that you got there, and then think, for me, once you get outside of that kind of top 16, 17 picks in a rookie draft, you need to be swinging for upside. The chances of hitting on a third round pick are less than 10%. So you need to be swinging for the moon. And yeah, Alec Ayumanor and Bashal Tutin, they're kind of high upside picks. So I think that makes sense.
At some point in the season, we'll get to be able to say the Titans wide receiver room without hesitating before we say every syllable. Rich, thank you very, very much. I know you've got to get off now as well. So Rich, Dynasty Island, he's at Dynasty Island over on X, co-founder, of course, of the Fantasy Sanctuary. Thank you very much for joining this huddle this week and enjoy your weekend.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
Well, there's not much more for me to add here at the end of this episode 13 of the Huddle UK podcast. Thank you very, very much to Rich for joining, as I said in the episode and right at the start. Make sure you go follow him. Make sure you go follow us. We'll have clips from all of the episodes, including this one, over on TikTok, over on Instagram, on YouTube, all the rest of it. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Huddle UK podcast. I've been the host, Philip Marsh, and we'll catch you in a fortnight's time.